demand and supply in economics. Theories of demand and supply in economics. Economics is all about management of resources. How best can a resources be managed? How best can a resources be produced? In economics, you have two agents. The first are the consumers, and the other ones are the producers. In economics, we normally see individuals as the consumers, and we see the firms as the producers. Who needs who, and who supply what others need? That brings us the issue of demand and supply in economics. So what is a demand? So demand in economics is the desire to own an ability to pay for commodity at a given price. Like we've said in wants and needs. One thing is your desire for something. Another thing is your financial power in order to command that. So you demand what you have desire for, and you have financial ability to own that at a particular time. And we have consumers have said consumers always demand for commodities in order to satisfy their needs. We have and again here what play mostly is the willingness, the willingness to pay. Demand goes with willingness. Demand without financial willingness to pay may be a non-active demand. So for you to be actively demanding for something, you have the financial power, you have the willingness to pay. The next we look at is demand schedule. Demand schedule. Demand schedule is a table which contains value for the price of goods and services, or also their quantity that will be demanded at a particular time. In demand table, we have a table in economics where you have the items, you have the quantity supplied or the quantity demanded, and you have the prices. In any schedule, any tabular schedule that contains the items, the quantity demanded, and the price in economics is seen as what? Demand schedule. We have demand curve. Demand curve is the relationship, try to illustrate the relationship between quantity demanded of a commodity and price of that commodity. In economics, demand curve is always downward sloping, coming down from the price axis towards the demand axis. In economics, we always have a demand curve that has quantity demanded in the horizontal axis and the price in the vertical axis. This portray it simply in economics that the higher the price, the downward sloping of demand curve in economics portray that the higher the price of a commodity, the lesser the quantity demanded of such commodity. So that is the reason why we have downward sloping of demand curve in economics. We move straight to types of demand. We have different types of demand in economics, but we mentioned few. We have joint demand, we have composite demand, short and long run demand, price demand, income demand, and so on and so forth. Demand in economics, when you say we have direct demand, we have derived demand in economics. Sometimes you demand for certain commodity in economics that you cannot use alone. You are trying to do what we call joint demand. For instance, for those of you that normally taste tea, you discover that tea normally goes with bread. Sometimes you see that when demand for tea increases, demand for bread also increases because there are joint demand. We have complementary demand. We have some demand that you demand for certain things in against the whole bulk of others. We have composite demand, we have price demand. Price demand is simply showing demand that is highly controlled by price of those commodities. We have push demand and we have pull demand. So we go on to factors that affect demand. One of the greatest factors that affect demand in the market is the price of that commodity. Price of that commodity. It is a tradition in economics that a normal goods have quantity demanded of such good coming down when the price of that commodity, moves up. That is a normal good. But a goods such as luxurious goods is a goods that even when the price of the goods rise, the quantity demanded still will rise, showing that maybe that goods is a relative demand or luxurious demand. People forming habit of certain things. No matter, for instance, those that smoke, whether the price of cigarettes increases due to habit and lifestyle, they will still demand more. So that is demand, price factors of demand. So we have other factors of demand. Price of relative or price of related goods. When you have goods that we call it joint demand goods, or we have a relative demand. When you have a goods that you can always substitute from one another, the demand for one good is going to reduce when the price increases, because the consumers will substitute such goods to the neighbor goods or the nearer goods. We call it a substitute kind of demand. So it means that price of one goods will affect the demand for the other goods. So not really that the price of such good. We have other factors such as disposable income. We have such disposable income, taste or preference, consumer expectation, government policy. These are different things that affect our demand for commodity at different levels. Go on. Next, we look at theory of supply. Supply looked at the firm's side of the market economy. The consumer, as we discussed before, will demand goods and services to satisfy their needs. But the firms are the producers. They supply commodity to the market. So what is supply? So supply is the quantity or the amount of some products produced and are willing and able to sell at a given price. As we are saying, firms produces output and supply the output looking at the price in the market. Firms tend to supply more in order to maximize their profit. And also, firm tends to increase their supply when price increases. Unlike the demand for commodities that will reduce when price increases, firms increase their supply when the price of such commodity increases, showing that firms, the primary objective of a firm is to maximize profit, while that of a consumer is to satisfy their needs. So we look at some factors that affect supply. Just like the factors that affect demand, the first primary factor that affects supply of commodity is the price of that commodity in the market. Price of that commodity in the market. Like we said, when price of a particular commodity rises, the firms tend to supply more in order to maximize their profit. Another thing is price of related goods. Price of related goods. A joint kind of demand or substitute demand in the market. When price of one item increases, the demand or the supply of the other one tends to change. For instance, if we have two types of tea, maybe we have a Milo tea and we have Ovaltine, and there are close substitute tea. When price of Milo increases, the suppliers of Milo, we want to increase their supply, but the demander, the consumers may want to reduce their demand and shift to the Ovaltine, which the price increases, and that will affect the quantity supply, because when price is low, the firm seems to supply less. So we have the demand and supply curve on the board. We see, as we've explained before, that the demand curve is downward sloping while the supply curve is upward sloping. The simple term is that consumers demand less when price increases, but suppliers supply more when price increases. So that is why we have that.